Men Behind the Wall. She joins us to talk about how engaging with prisoners there informs and inspires her push for dramatic criminal justice reform. We're also going to talk about how she is truly giving public service new meaning by going public about, well, actually, we'll let her tell you what she's going public about in a video that is powerful for its candor, its compassion, and that is being talked about all over this country. Congresswoman Pressley, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for being here.
Great to see you. Happy New Year. Happy New Decade.
Yes.
You all are looking great, so you're already living up to those New Year's resolutions.
That's
I can
right.
tell.
That's right.
All right.
Absolutely.
Good stuff.
I had 2 sandwiches for lunch, but it's a special day because you're here.
Other than that, Congresswoman Pressley, Jim just mentioned this video that a lot of us were watching yesterday, and I commend you for your honesty and your courage, really. But tell people about the video that is everybody's talking about all across the country. You know, the Washington Post, you're everywhere.
Okay, so yesterday I became I presented a video where I went public with the fact that I'm living with alopecia, which is an autoimmune disease, a skin disease where your immune system attacks all of your hair follicles. And the reason why I decided to go public with it is, you know, the fact that I had been wearing my hair in braids for a number of years meant a lot to a lot of people. It's not often that you see women of color in spaces that have traditionally been more conservative, wearing their hair in what many would consider to be an ethno or Afrocentric hairstyle. But in my community, it's just a protective hairstyle. It's a way of protecting your natural hair. And my wearing my hair in these Senegalese twists and braids had become this really conflated part of my personal identity as well as my political brand. And little girls were writing me from throughout the globe to say how much it meant to them, just the power of the representation. You know, mommy, she wears her hair like I wear mine. And there were T-shirts that had been created that said, my Congresswoman wears braids. And so I felt that the fact that I was enduring a very private battle required that I be public about it because my presentation had changed. And I felt that I owed all those little girls an explanation. But the other thing is, and this is not just true for my alopecia, living with alopecia, but I do believe in general that I'm here to not just occupy space, but to create it. And I've done that as a survivor of sexual violence. I've done that in a host of ways. And I think that's what's incumbent upon all of us in positions of leadership. There's nothing extraordinary about me. I don't think I did anything exceptionally brave yesterday. I don't, because it's my story, but it is the story of millions who know the trauma and the personal pain of hair loss, whether because of chemotherapy and cancer, whether because of genetics and heredity, whether because of alopecia. And I have a new squad now, the Bald Squad. And all of these people living with alopecia, men and women alike, who have experienced hair loss, have been reaching out and saying, welcome to the alopecia family. I talked to a little girl who is 11, was diagnosed at 9. She has totalis like I do, which means it very quickly accelerated, and she went to total baldness. And she said she thinks she can teach me a thing or two. She said she just went to school and told her peers, I'm bald, but I'm still me. And, you know, so I really have been humbled and overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. And in the same way that we created space for millions when I wore my hair in braids, I did not realize the extent to which that would be true when it comes to hair loss.
So I want to spend one more minute on this before we get to criminal justice. I rarely tell a congressperson on the show you were dead wrong, but you were dead wrong. When you said it was nothing brave, it was not, I mean, no, please. Let's not.
I didn't feel that.
Having said that, the timing, when you talk in this, I hope people go to the Root and check out this video if they haven't seen it, 7 minutes long. When did you describe the final pieces of hair of yours fall out? What was the timing for that?
Well, it was an inflection point not only in my life, but for the country. So I had been for weeks working creatively to conceal this rapid hair loss, baldness. And that was stressful in and of itself. And then the night before I was to cast a vote in support of impeachment articles, I went completely bald. I was in the privacy of my home alone. I took several bathroom selfies. I sent them to my husband, who has been an extraordinary partner throughout what has been a really transformative, disruptive life event, not of my own choosing. And he assured me that I was beautiful, and I was grateful for that. But in a matter of hours, I was going to have to go onto a public stage, into the House floor, and I did not think I could go onto the House floor bald without an explanation. And some people have said, why is this a big deal? What's political about this? Well, I'm a woman, I'm black, and I'm in a public space. Everything I do is political, even if that's not my intention. And so if I had just gone to the floor bald, I think people would have thought I was making a statement. And so we worked creatively with a hairstylist to customize a wig for me. And then I had to go out on the House floor, and I'll just close here and say that I was wearing boots, tights, a skirt, a shirt, a jacket, a belt, and this wig. And I'd never felt more vulnerable or more naked in my life, and embarrassed and ashamed. And but I had to lean in and stand in the moment, because I had to go and make the case for articles of impeachment.
Wow, that's all I can say.
Well-
We're talking to Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, and once again, you rarely make film recommendations. Go watch the video and do it soon.
Okay, let's move on to what you've been doing regarding criminal justice reform. You went to MCI Norfolk with a delegation. You're very involved in the bill about criminal justice reform, but tell us what happened, what you did at MCI Norfolk.
Sure. Well, let me just backtrack for a second and say that throughout my run for Congress, I said that the people closest to the pain should be closest to the power, driving and informing the policy making. And, you know, that isn't just some slogan. That's a lived practice and a value, along with myself and my dedicated A-team. And so in my first year in Congress, I've introduced 30 bills. I've co-sponsored almost 400 pieces of legislation. I've written and passed about 10 amendments. And I have not cast, and I've cast 700 plus votes, right? So there is not a vote that I've cast, a bill that I've written, an amendment that I've authored, a bill that I've co-sponsored, that I was not directly informed by those closest to and most impacted by the issue. And so that is certainly true and continued for the issue of what I call transforming our criminal legal system. And so the Congressional Black Caucus, which was a historic visit, for history purposes, the Massachusetts delegation had 2 African-American members in the Senate, Ed Brooke, who was the first black attorney general elected, and then the first United States senator. And then after him, we had Mo Cowan, the esteemed Mo Cowan, who was appointed by Deval Patrick. But we have never had a person of color, an African-American, a black woman, to represent the Massachusetts delegation in the House of Representatives in its 230-year history. So this fly-in, the CBC fly-in, was historic because I'm a first, and so this is a first.
They had never been to Boston. Is that correct?
As a contingent.
As a contingent,
So
right.
there are CBC fly-ins, Congressional Black Caucus fly-ins. Now, again, there are 54 members in the Congressional Black Caucus out of our 200-plus member Democratic caucus, and out of our 436-member Congress. The Congressional Black Caucus is often referenced as the conscience of the Congress. So the CBC fly-in that I organized was consistent with the fly-ins that have been taking place throughout the country to assess the state of Black America. And we went behind the wall of MCI Norfolk, because again, on the issue of reforming our criminal legal system, transforming it, I want to engage those most impacted. And so there are a cohort of men there with incredible acumen about the law and about government and lawmaking. It's a contingent of men called the AACC, the African American Coalition Committee. These are men that I worked with during my campaign. In fact, they had organized from behind the wall a minimum of 3 family members to go to the polls and to vote. They endorsed my candidacy. They endorsed Rachel Rollins' candidacy. So they are very civically engaged, politically minded. And so we went there because I was going to keep my promise. I promised them that I would return if I was fortunate enough to be elected. And so this has been, this was my 3rd visit with them. I promised I'd come back with the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. I did not know I would have 5 other colleagues in tow with me. And so it was incredibly powerful. And so what was centered in that meeting was my People's Justice Guarantee resolution, something that I've introduced to usher in a paradigm shift, something transformative. I think that our criminal legal system is so fundamentally flawed and broken that it cannot be reformed by tinkering at the edges, that we need a transformative, a bold, radical reimagining of what the criminal legal system can be by prioritizing decarceration. The 1994 crime bill prioritized and incentivized mass incarceration. And I don't believe we're any safer. When people say to me, but what of the public safety? No one wakes up and wants to be a victim. And I don't believe anyone wakes up or was born to be a perpetrator, okay? I think that, all of us deserve to live in a community and a society that is safe, where we can be healthy and where we can thrive. And as someone who grew up with an incarcerated parent, I think that's an important perspective to offer here as well. My father was in and out of the criminal legal system for 14 years. Now, my father is a brilliant man, okay? But my father was battling, like millions of Americans, substance abuse disorder and opioid addiction specifically. He committed crimes to support his addiction. He committed crimes, but my father was no criminal. What my father deserved was on-demand, culturally competent treatment to address the traumas that resulted in his self-medicating. Prison should be the last stop, not the first. And so by decriminalizing poverty, decriminalizing homelessness, low-level offenses, why would we ever lock somebody up for evading a public transit fare? Particularly if they're experiencing homelessness and trying to get to their shelter bed before it closes. So by decriminalizing poverty, homelessness, and low-level offenses, and disease like that of what my father experienced, we think we can get to 80% plus decarceration. And finally, my father went on to attain 2 advanced degrees, to become a professor of journalism and a published author. So that is what is possible when we make the investments in true reform and rehabilitation.
We've gotten a taste of this, obviously. That was a huge part of what you're talking about, Congresswoman, is what Rachel Rollins ran upon. Got a mere 80% of the vote elected to Suffolk County DA. But break that down for us. Tell us what some of the key elements of this plan that you put together are.
So the People's Justice Guarantee resolution, again, is a bold, transformative, radical reimagining of our criminal legal system. And some of the top lines of it call for, certainly sentencing reform, abolishing the death penalty, doing away with juvenile detention facilities, abolishing private prisons, because as unjust as our criminal legal system has been, it has also been incredibly profitable. And so this is also something that we aim to address, is the and then finally, 2 pieces of legislation that I've rolled out to begin to codify the tenets of the People's Justice Guarantee resolution, and that is to end the school to confinement pathway, which is growing disproportionately for girls of color. In Boston, black girls are 6 times more likely than their white peers to be disciplined, suspended, or expelled for the same infractions as their white peers. Black girls are losing classroom time because people say their hair is distracting. Their hair is being criminalized. Their bodies are being criminalized. And it is putting them on a pathway to the school to confinement, to incarceration. That is just not acceptable. And then finally, doing away with the death penalty. Now, in Massachusetts, we don't have the death penalty. What we do have is life imprisonment without parole, which might as well be the death penalty. So when I am meeting a graying population behind the wall of people who committed offenses when they were 17, 18, 19 years of age, and now they have gotten, and they have been self-taught and have a lot to contribute. The members of the CBC were so impressed with the level of acumen and facilitation. They said that it exceeded that of what they've experienced in corporate boardrooms. And so we need the benefit of that intellectual capital out here. And also, we're spending a great deal of money. I mean, $50,000 per incarcerated man or woman. And so if they no longer pose a threat to society, why are they behind the wall?
Can I pick up on that number thing? Ordinarily, my reaction, if you had done this 5 years ago, would be say, this is great, you care about equity, care about compassion, you have no chance. What it seems to me, what we've lived through in the last handful of years is this odd sort of coalition between the right and the left, for lack of a better expression, with progressives concerned going at it from the direction you're going, where conservatives are worried about that $50,000 a year, are worried about the huge cost of being the most incarcerating nation in the world.
Absolutely.
So there is some potential
yes,
for
and,
bipartisanship
and that is
here,
why
yes?
we were able, there was legislation that was advanced, that was bipartisan, to begin to speak to this. And now we're just offering something. That was a first step. The first step legislation. But now we're offering, and I think there's a paradigm shift, to your point, Jim, happening in the country. We're really at an inflection point where we reject the idea that people will be any less safe if we are just more compassionate and smarter about how we go about reform, rehabilitation. I mean, as an example, one of the things that we prioritize is an investment in supporting people in their reentry into society. How can you, in good conscience, tell people, we want you to go out and make a positive contribution? Jim, Marjorie, they're being released, 30% of them, to shelters. So if we know that the number one driver of recidivism is unemployment, it is disingenuous when people can't even, I mean, the affordable housing crisis is real for everyone. However, those that have quarries, who have served their time, face great discrimination, both in housing and employment, although they are desperate to make a positive, legitimate contribution to society. So we're really looking at this issue holistically. And then finally, in the Massachusetts 7th Congressional District, 1 in 4 children are like me, and they have an incarcerated loved one or caregiver. And so we know that this is resulting in family separation and the decimation of community.
You know something, Congressman Pressley, you mentioned that your dad was in and out of prison, that he went on to have a very contribute greatly in his life. But what was that like for you as a kid? I mean, it's tough to talk about your dad being in jail. It's tough to go visit dad in jail because they make you feel like a criminal yourself coming in to visit dad in jail. What was that like?
Sure. I felt the social stigma of having an incarcerated loved one. And I felt a resentment and hurt, like millions of children who have parents that battle addiction. You have resentment in that you feel that they've chosen their addiction over your family. And so, yes, it was very destabilizing on our household. But again, I've been transparent in telling my story and my father's story and how it impacted our family, because we're not anomalies. Jim McGovern and I just introduced legislation to support this new family model that has emerged, and that is grand families, and to incentivize HUD, Housing and Urban Development, to use the power of the purse and to provide grants to support grand families in their housing. Who am I talking about? Grandparents raising grandchildren. That is at an epidemic. We have this new family model because of this public health crisis and epidemic that is opioid addiction, that is substance abuse disorder, because of mass incarceration, because of poverty, because of the number of people that are serving in the military right now. So there's a residual sort of domino effect in all of these things. But again, 1 in 4 children in the Massachusetts 7th is a child like I was and has an incarcerated loved one or caregiver.
So you read some of the headlines about the prison system in Massachusetts. Prison system fails to process inmate health care requests promptly. Families had to stay at house to fight for lower phone rates because they have these exorbitant phone rates you can't even afford to call your families at home. The ACLU is suing the state for denying inmates medication that they need for their drug addiction. Last year at MCI Norfolk, we all read about the fact that prisoners were drinking water that smelled bad and looked like black tea, and they thought it was filled with stuff that was causing neurological disorders. Have they cleaned up the water yet at MCI Norfolk, or are they still drinking out of bottles down there?
Well, I can't speak to that, but what I will say is that my priority is decarceration And then secondarily is prison reform. And then third is successful reintegration and reentry. Because of my own experience, I'm very focused on how do we maintain those familial bonds while a loved one is incarcerated without families going bankrupt, right? And then how do we, because that has become, again, it's profitable,
Yeah,
right?
phone calls.
It's profitable. And then on that note, because I wouldn't be doing my job if I did not talk to everyone about the 2020 census. And I want to tell you something unconscionable, that incarcerated men and women are being counted in the census. This is prison gerrymandering, according to where they are being warehoused. And correctional facilities are by and large in suburban communities. And so these communities are getting an allocation of federal investment when I believe that those dollars should be going to the home communities that those incarcerated men and women are coming from, which have often contributed to an ecosystem that would put them on a pathway to the criminal legal system and to incarceration. And that's unacceptable. One of the other things we talk about in the People's Justice Guarantee Resolution is incarcerated men and women having access to the ballot. You know, because this is these are a number of folks that have already been disenfranchised, and then you know, probably one of the incarcerated men had said that it is the greatest civil injustice and sanction to then further disenfranchise people and deny them access to the ballot.
You know, one related thing I just want to mention before we leave the topic. I don't know if you've read Martha Minow's book, former head of Harvard Law School, When Should Law Forgive? But she was on a couple of weeks ago with us, and I was thinking about it because when you mentioned bankruptcy, in this brilliant piece she writes about forgiveness in criminal cases, why is it, because you mentioned the word bankruptcy, Congresswoman, why is it on the civil side of the law we think it's okay to forgive? Meaning if you have debts, it's okay, even though most people who get bankruptcy are the Donald Trumps of the world. Why have we not been able to forgive? And in this process of decarcerating, as you call it, on the criminal side, it's brilliant writing, brilliant thinking. It so naturally fits, in my opinion, into the direction
to that
you're
end,
going.
I just want to say something that I think is because it's so easy in debates around very complex issues that we need to be considering through an intersectional lens and more comprehensively, that these things get boiled down to just one digestible soundbite, okay? Again, I don't think anyone is born to or wakes up wanting to be a victim or to be a perpetrator, okay? And I'm in no way saying that if someone has committed a crime, that they should not serve their time. But what we want is equal application of the law, and that has not happened. So that's why we call for sentencing reform, because we see that there are disparities in sentencing for the same crimes. In the same way that I said that in our school system, that in Boston, black girls are 6 times more likely to be disciplined, suspended, or expelled. It's not because black girls are behaving more badly than their white peers. It's that they are being disciplined differently for the same infractions. And so all we're looking for here is, one, to center and prioritize dignity, safety, equality, freedom, shared power. We want a criminal legal system that centers humanity and dignity, and we want equal application of the law when it comes to sentencing and when it comes to treatment. And then we want to make those formidable investments for those who have served their time to make sure that they can successfully re-enter and reintegrate into society, to make the contribution that they desire and seek to make, to play a role in stopping other young people from going down a similar pathway. And right now, that is not happening.
You know, one last thing on this. I don't know if you saw criticism of you in something called Law Enforcement Today by some correctional officers' organizations. And I thought of this because of what you said a minute ago. You're not arguing that people shouldn't pay a price for what they've done. Their criticism of you was, and I'll boil it down, even though it was much less respectful than this, I should say, and I think intentionally not understanding what you were about there, that you cared more about people who'd committed crimes than corrections officers, including some who had been physically assaulted at MCI Norfolk. What do you say to those people?
I'm so glad you asked that question. First of all, You know, I come from a family of law enforcement. A little well-known fact, my mother actually went through the police academy in Ohio, which is where my mother was born and raised, Cincinnati. So I come from a family of law enforcement, and I have tremendous respect for those who make it their business to keep the peace. And one of the things the People's Justice Guarantee Resolution calls for are trauma-informed services and access to behavioral health services, both for correction officers and also for those who are incarcerated. Here's what I'm saying. If the environment is not safe, no one thrives. I don't want COs feeling unsafe. I don't want incarcerated men and women feeling unsafe. Everyone deserves to have the dignity, to have their humanity centered, and to be safe, whether it's at their place of work, in a cell, in their home, in community. And so I don't tier the value of anyone. I have tremendous respect for and gratitude for those that are in law enforcement. Again, what we're looking for here is just a complete shift of culture, and that includes one that supports an ecosystem where everyone feels safe.
You know, Congresswoman, you mentioned before that you went in to make the vote for the impeachment, and you were dealing with the alopecia and all the concern about that. Of course, you did vote. Now we're facing a trial in the Senate. I'm wondering, for those people who are a little discouraged, because many people just think this is going to be a rubber stamp by the Senate and the president will be acquitted. Do you have any hope for those who are worried, or how do you, I mean?
Yeah. Okay, so, yeah. Here's the thing. You know, I've been supportive of pursuing articles of impeachment or an impeachment investigation or inquiry since April. And not because I went to Congress to impeach a president. You know, this is nothing to be celebratory about. I have a sobered heart about why we need to do this, but also a resolved one, because of the people in this district who have experienced real fear and fragility and compounded hurt. When it comes to the Trump administration and their policies, the cruelty is the point. And when it comes to their culture, the corruption and the chaos is the point. And so I believe we have put forward a very tight case. And as you see, we continue to have, I think, more revealings that are coming out that confirm what we know, is that the corruption is pervasive. The Mueller report did not get us to a place of impeachment, but don't forget that people were indicted and sentenced, and it really did speak to the pervasive nature of culture. I personally believe the Mueller report did prove obstruction of justice, and we have had too many instances of abuse of power and authority. Look, you guys, I serve on the Oversight and Reform Committee. And the level of obstruction, evading, and stonewalling has been unprecedented. They have tried to hamstring Congress from doing our job as patriots, not a partisan pursuit. The truth is not partisan. You know, preserving our democracy, this is not about Donald Trump. This is about the office of the presidency, and that we cannot endorse the lawlessness that has taken place there. Now, so far as the Senate is concerned, let me just say this. If you believe that he's innocent, then why wouldn't you support documents and witnesses to support an alibi? If they move to dismissal or acquittal, then what that reads to me is cover up. And I'm going to sleep well at night, because I know this Democratic majority Congress did our job. And whether Donald J. Trump likes it or not, he has forever been impeached. That will not change.
You know, before you go, I know you have only 1 minute left, but I'm watching this video of you last night, and part of the video is you walk into the lectern to make your speech. And it's like an out-of-body experience for me, and to some degree. Not so many years ago, we were talking about Ayanna Pressley voting on a plastic bag ban.
Yes,
or an
which I'm so glad we passed.
Or an electrified manhole cover. Do you, I mean, when you're walking, what is the feeling when you're, only 3 times in American history has an individual had an opportunity to vote on impeaching a president of the United States. You're going from what you did, I'm not minimizing the importance of being a city councilor, to walking down to the lectern to say you're about to vote?
What can I
to
say, Jim?
I mean, it's unbelievable.
It has been quite a year. I was onboarded in this 116th class, which is unprecedented in its representation and diversity in the midst of a federal government shutdown. At the 1-year mark almost of my serving in Congress, I voted on articles of impeachment. I went bald. I returned to Congress in the midst of us potentially being on the precipice of war. And so I do just want to say, to go back to this, on the issue of our criminal legal system, to me, it's not that dissimilar from the debate I'm trying to have now in Congress around foreign policy. I reject binary choices that we have to choose between peace and security. I believe that we can have both. And I reject the binary choices of pitting groups against one another. I care about the safety of everyone. This is just about equal application of the law and the acknowledgement that our destinies and our freedoms are tied. And we need to center the humanity and dignity of our fellow neighbors wherever we are. But I feel humbled. I feel grateful. This is surreal. I feel that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And if it's not obvious, I love what I do. I am so honored to be able to be doing it.
I think it's
Yikes.
obvious. I think it's obvious,
Congresswoman, it's great to see
Thank
you.
you very
Thank
much
you all.
for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Congresswoman Ayanna
Thank you for
Pressley,
having
the
me.
Democrat representing the 7th Congressional District. Coming up, how calling out the Oscars for its diversity problem is an age-old tradition. Callie Crossley takes us back to the days predating hashtag. She's next on 89.7 WGBH Boston Public Radio.